They called her too soft for special operations, too emotional for the teams, too European, whatever that meant. Lieutenant Irene Hill stood at 5'6" with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of old-world cathedrals and a voice that trembled when she got angry. In a world of hardened SEALs who measured respect in pull-ups and kill counts, she was the intelligence officer they tolerated but never truly accepted, until the day a senior operator publicly challenged her authority in front of the entire task force. What happened next didn't just silence him. It changed everything they thought they knew about strength, leadership, and what it really means to earn respect in the most elite fighting force in the world. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning sun hung low over the naval base in Souda Bay, Greece, casting long shadows across the tarmac where Task Force Poseidon conducted their pre-mission briefings. It was the kind of bright Mediterranean morning that belonged in travel brochures, not in the world of classified operations and silent warriors. But here, beauty and brutality existed side by side, separated only by chain-link fences and security clearances. Lieutenant Irene Hill arrived at the operations center at 0530, 30 minutes before the official briefing time. She learned early in her assignment that being early was the only way to avoid the stares and whispered comments that followed her entrance. At 26, she was one of the youngest intelligence officers assigned to a SEAL task force, and the only woman in a command structure that treated her presence like an unwelcome experiment. The ops center smelled of coffee, gun oil, and the peculiar mix of salt air and electronics that characterized every naval facility she'd ever worked in. Irene set her briefing materials on the conference table and began arranging the classified folders in precise order. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, though she noticed the slight tremor that appeared whenever she knew she'd have to address the team. Her European accent, a melodic blend of her Hungarian mother and Austrian father, had been both her trademark and her curse. To some, it suggested sophistication and intelligence. To the operators of Task Force Poseidon, it suggested she was an outsider, someone who didn't understand the American warrior culture that defined their world. The door banged open, and Chief Petty Officer Derek Vaughn strode in, his presence filling the room like a force of nature. At 38, Vaughn was a legend in the SEAL community, with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for getting missions done no matter the cost. He was also the most vocal critic of Irene's assignment to the task force. "Morning, Lieutenant," Vaughn said, his tone carrying just enough respect to avoid insubordination, but lacking any genuine warmth. "Got your intelligence brief ready for us? Hope it's better than last week's dissertation on regional politics." Irene felt her cheeks flush, but kept her voice steady. "Good morning, Chief. Yes, the brief is prepared. I believe you'll find the intelligence actionable and relevant to today's operation." Vaughn poured himself coffee, taking his time, making her wait. "You know what's actionable, Lieutenant? Intel that tells me where the bad guys are and how many weapons they're carrying. What's not actionable is a lecture on the socio-economic factors that led them to become bad guys in the first place." Other team members began filtering in, and Irene noticed how they positioned themselves. Some took seats near Vaughn, forming an invisible alliance. Others remained neutral, taking positions that suggested they were reserving judgment. No one sat near her. "I understand your preference for tactical brevity, Chief," Irene replied, organizing her notes to avoid his stare. "However, understanding the operational environment includes cultural and political factors that can mean the difference between mission success and creating new enemies." "Creating new enemies," Vaughn repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "That's real pretty, Lieutenant, real academic. But out there," he gestured toward the window and the world beyond, "the enemy doesn't care about our understanding of their culture. They care about killing Americans." Lieutenant Commander Hayes entered the room, and everyone stood at attention. Hayes was the task force commander, a career officer who'd risen through the ranks by being politically astute and operationally competent. He'd approved Irene's assignment, but had made it clear that she needed to prove herself to the team. "As you were," Hayes said, taking his position at the head of the table. "Lieutenant Hill, you have the floor. Let's hear what intelligence has for us today." Irene moved to the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the floor. Projection system. Her hands had stopped trembling, replaced by the focused calm that came when she immersed herself in her work. Whatever doubts she had about her place on this team, she had none about her abilities as an intelligence analyst. "Gentlemen," she began, and immediately noticed Vaughn's smirk at her word choice. "We've received updated intelligence on the target compound in Sector 4. The asset we've been tracking, codenamed Prometheus, has been confirmed at this location for the past 72 hours. She brought up satellite imagery on the screen, annotated with her analysis. The compound consists of 3 main structures, with reinforced walls and limited access points. Our signals intelligence suggests between 8 and 12 hostile fighters, armed with small arms and possibly 1 or 2 crew-served weapons." "Possibly?" Vaughn interrupted. "Lieutenant, we need definites, not possibilities. Are there machine guns in that compound or not?" Irene took a breath, feeling the familiar frustration rise. "Chief, intelligence rarely deals in absolutes. Based on the communications intercepts and the thermal imaging, there is a high probability of crew-served weapons. I've marked the most likely positions on your tactical maps." "High probability," Vaughn repeated, looking around at his teammates. "Guys, what do you think? Should we plan our assault around high probability, or should we assume the worst and be prepared for anything?" Several operators chuckled, and Irene felt the sting of dismissal. She'd prepared a comprehensive brief with multiple scenarios and contingency plans, but Vaughn was reducing her work to academic uncertainty. Hayes intervened. "Chief, let her finish the brief. We'll address concerns afterward." Irene continued, walking through the intelligence picture with meticulous detail. She covered approach routes, civilian population patterns, local security force positions, and the political implications of the operation. She'd spent 48 hours preparing this briefing, cross-referencing multiple intelligence sources, and building a complete operational picture. When she finished, Hayes nodded approvingly. "Solid work, Lieutenant." "Questions from the team?" Vaughn's hand went up immediately. "Sir, I've got a question about the intelligence officer's understanding of how we operate. No disrespect intended," he added, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But Lieutenant Hill's briefings always seem to focus on everything except what we need to know to do our jobs." The room went quiet. This wasn't tactical questioning. This was a direct challenge. "Chief Vaughn," Hayes said, his voice carrying a warning tone, "Lieutenant Hill has provided actionable intelligence. What specifically do you find lacking?" Vaughn leaned back in his chair, his body language radiating confidence. "Sir, what I find lacking is practical experience. The lieutenant here is great with her satellite photos and her intercepts, but she's never been downrange. She doesn't know what it's like when bullets start flying and plans fall apart. She's giving us academic intelligence when what we need is warrior intelligence." Irene felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd expected resistance, had dealt with skepticism since day one, but this was different. This was a senior operator openly questioning her competence in front of the entire team. "Chief," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "my role is to provide you with the best possible intelligence picture so that you can make informed, tactical decisions. I don't need to have been in combat to analyze patterns, assess threats, and identify opportunities." "Don't you?" Vaughn shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, someone who's never heard a shot fired in anger is telling me how to do my job. And that, Lieutenant, is a problem." The tension in the operations center had shifted from professional disagreement to something more personal, more dangerous. Irene could feel every eye in the room on her, measuring her response, deciding whether she deserved to be there. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood, his jaw tight. "Chief Vaughn, you're out of line. Lieutenant Hill is a commissioned officer and your superior in this chain of command. Her combat experience, or lack thereof, doesn't diminish her expertise in intelligence analysis." "With respect, sir," Vaughn replied, though there was no respect in his tone, "rank doesn't mean much if it's not backed by experience. We've got lieutenants fresh out of the academy who think they can lead SEALs because they pinned on some gold bars. The operators know the difference between someone who's earned their place and someone who's checking a diversity box. The room erupted. Several operators shifted uncomfortably, a few nodded in agreement with Vaughn, and Hayes' face turned red with barely contained anger. "Stand down, Chief," Hayes ordered. "That's enough." But Vaughn wasn't finished. He turned to face Irene directly, his eyes challenging her to respond. "No offense, Lieutenant, but maybe you'd be better suited to a staff position somewhere safe. Let the operators have an intelligence officer who understands what we actually do." Irene felt her hands clench into fists. The tremor was back, but now it wasn't from nervousness. It was from rage, from months of accumulated slights and dismissals, from every time her competence had been questioned because she didn't fit their narrow definition of what a military professional should be. "Chief Vaughn," she said, her accent becoming more pronounced as emotion crept into her voice. "You are absolutely right about one thing. I have never been in combat. I have never fired a weapon at another human being. But I have spent 5 years studying the enemies you face. I speak 4 languages fluently. I have analyzed thousands of hours of intercepts, hundreds of operation reports, and I have built intelligence pictures that have kept teams like yours alive." She stepped closer to him, aware that she was probably crossing professional boundaries but no longer caring. "You want warrior intelligence? Let me tell you what warrior intelligence looks like. It looks like me working 18-hour days to make sure you know exactly what you're walking into. It looks like me coordinating with 6 different intelligence agencies across 3 continents to build a target package. It looks like me staying awake for 48 hours straight to provide real-time intelligence updates during your last operation." Vaughn's expression didn't change. "That's your job, Lieutenant. That's what intelligence officers do. But doing your job from an air-conditioned office doesn't make you a warrior." "You're right," Irene said, her voice dropping to something cold and controlled. "It doesn't make me a warrior in your definition. But tell me, Chief, when you and your team are planning an operation, who provides the target? Analysis? When you need to know the difference between a wedding party and a terrorist cell, who do you ask? When you need to understand why the local security forces can't be trusted, who briefs you?" "That's different," Vaughn started, but Irene cut him off. "It's not different. It's intelligence. It's my specialty, my expertise, my contribution to the mission. You don't need to have jumped out of helicopters to be valuable to this team. You just need to be excellent at what you do. And Chief Vaughn, I am excellent at what I do." The room had gone completely silent. Several operators were staring at Irene with expressions she couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. Possibly respect. Maybe just shocked that the quiet European lieutenant had finally pushed back. Hayes cleared his throat. "I think we've had enough drama for one morning. Lieutenant Hill's intelligence brief stands as presented. Team leads, review the materials and prepare your operational plans. We launch at 2200 hours. Dismissed." The operators filed out, most avoiding eye contact with either Irene or Vaughn. As the room emptied, Hayes gestured for both of them to remain. "Chief," Hayes said once they were alone, "I don't care about your personal opinions regarding Lieutenant Hill's qualifications, but I do care about unit cohesion and respect for rank. You crossed a line today." "Sir, I was expressing legitimate operational concerns," Vaughn replied, though his tone had moderated slightly. "No, you were grandstanding and undermining an officer in front of her subordinates. There's a difference." Hayes turned to Irene. "Lieutenant, I apologize for Chief Vaughn's conduct. It won't happen again." "Sir," Irene began, then paused. What she wanted to say was that it happened all the time, just usually more subtly. That Vaughn had simply vocalized what many of the operators felt. That she was tired of proving herself over and over again only to start from zero with each new mission. Instead, she said, "I understand the team's concerns about my lack of combat experience, but I would appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate my value in the field rather than just in briefing rooms." Hayes frowned. "Lieutenant, your position is as an intelligence analyst. You're not trained for combat operations." "I've completed the same basic training as every officer in this Navy," Irene countered. "I can handle a weapon. I can provide security for myself. And I understand tactical operations better than most intelligence officers because I've studied them obsessively." "This isn't about your capabilities," Hayes said. It's about maintaining proper roles within the team. With respect, sir, if I'm going to continue providing intelligence to this task force, I need to understand their operational reality. A day or two attached to a team during an operation would be invaluable for my analysis. Vaughn laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. Sir, you can't be seriously considering sending her down range. She'd be a liability. We'd spend more time protecting her than accomplishing the mission. I wouldn't need protection, Irene shot back. I would observe and provide real-time intelligence support. I wouldn't interfere with your operations. Lieutenant, Hayes said, his tone final, your request is noted but denied. Your value to this task force is in your analysis, not in the field. Chief Vaughn, you're dismissed. Report to your team for mission prep. Vaughn left without another word, though Irene caught the satisfaction in his expression. He challenged her authority and, despite Hayes' reprimand, had essentially won. She would remain in her air-conditioned office, forever the outsider looking in. After Vaughn departed, Hayes sat down heavily in one of the briefing room chairs. Lieutenant, off the record, I understand your frustration, but you have to understand the team's perspective. They're protective of their community. Letting outsiders in, especially in combat situations, goes against their instincts. Am I always going to be an outsider, sir? Irene asked quietly. No matter how good my work is, no matter how hard I try to earn their respect, will I always be the diversity box that Vaughn mentioned? Hayes was silent for a long moment. I won't lie to you. The SEAL community is traditional, insular, and resistant to change. But they respect competence and courage. If you continue producing excellent intelligence and remain professional in the face of challenges, you'll eventually win them over. Eventually, Irene thought. How many more confrontations? How many more briefings where her work was dismissed? How many more times would she have to prove what should have already been proven? She gathered her materials and left the operations center, walking out into the bright Greek sunshine. The Mediterranean sparkled in the distance, beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of the people living along its shores. Irene made her way to the intelligence office, a small, windowless room filled with computers and classified documents. This was her domain, the place where she was undeniably competent. Here, she didn't have to justify her presence or defend her expertise. The intelligence spoke for itself. She settled into her chair and pulled up the latest intercepts from the target area. The operation scheduled for tonight was relatively straightforward, a snatch and grab of a mid-level operative who had information about a larger network. The team would infiltrate, extract the target, and exfiltrate before local security forces could respond. But as Irene reviewed the intercepts, something caught her attention. A reference in one of the communications to a meeting scheduled for the same night as the operation. It was vague, probably nothing, but her instincts told her to dig deeper. She spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing communications patterns, analyzing travel movements, and building a timeline. What emerged was troubling. The target compound wasn't just housing Prometheus. It was scheduled to host a gathering of several high-value individuals, including one that intelligence had been tracking for months. This changed everything. The operation wasn't just a simple extraction anymore. It was a potential windfall of intelligence, but only if the team knew what they were walking into. Irene immediately drafted an updated intelligence brief and sent it to Hayes and the team leads. Then she sat back, waiting for the inevitable response. Her phone rang within minutes. Lieutenant Hill? Hayes' voice was tense. Your updated brief suggests we've got multiple high-value targets at the compound tonight. Yes, sir. The intercepts indicate a meeting scheduled for approximately 2300 hours. If our timing is right, we could potentially capture not just Prometheus, but several other priority targets. This is a significant change to the mission profile, Hayes said. Why didn't this come up in your original briefing? Sir, the intercepts that confirmed the meeting came in after the briefing. I've been monitoring communications continuously and only identified the pattern within the last few hours. There was a pause. Good work, Lieutenant. This could be a major opportunity, but it also increases the risk profile significantly. More targets means more security, more complications. Yes, sir. I'm preparing an updated threat assessment now. Bring it to the Tactical Operations Center in 1 hour. We need to revise the mission plan. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The Tactical Operations Center buzzed with controlled urgency when Irene arrived with her updated brief. The space was larger than the morning briefing room, filled with communications, equipment, computer, terminals, and large displays showing real-time satellite feeds of the target area. The assault team leaders had gathered around the main planning table, their faces serious as they reviewed the original mission parameters. Irene noticed Vaughn immediately. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression suggesting he was already skeptical of whatever she was about to present. Several other operators glanced her way, their reactions ranging from curious to dismissive. "Gentlemen," Hayes announced, "Lieutenant Hill has updated intelligence that significantly impacts tonight's operation." "Lieutenant, walk us through it." Irene connected her laptop to the main display and brought up the communications intercepts. At 1400 hours today, our signals intelligence picked up a reference to a gathering at the target compound. Initially, it appeared to be routine, but further analysis revealed something more significant. She highlighted specific phrases in the intercepted communications. The terminology used here, meeting of the council, isn't standard language for this cell. Cross-referencing with historical intercepts, this phrase has only appeared 3 times in the past 18 months. Each time, it preceded a gathering of senior leadership. "How senior?" one of the team leaders asked. "We've identified at least 3 confirmed high-value targets who've been traveling toward this region over the past 48 hours. Their convergence on this location isn't coincidental." Irene brought up photographs and dossiers. "In addition to Prometheus, we potentially have Kratos, Apollo, and Hades, all code names for individuals we've been tracking for months." The room erupted in low conversations. This wasn't just an upgraded mission. It was a potential intelligence goldmine. Vaughn stepped forward, studying the display. "Lieutenant, how confident are you in this assessment?" Irene met his gaze directly. 85% confidence on the meeting occurring. 70% confidence on the specific individuals attending. The intercepts are clear about timing and significance, but less specific about exact attendees. "So we could be walking into a much larger force than originally briefed," Vaughn said. "Potentially, yes. But you could also be walking into an opportunity to remove a significant portion of the enemy leadership structure in a single operation." Hayes studied the intelligence picture. "Lieutenant, what's your recommended course of action?" This was the moment Irene had been waiting for. Not just to provide intelligence, but to contribute to operational planning. "Sir, I recommend proceeding with the operation, but with enhanced force posture. Instead of a 6-man extraction team, I'd suggest 12 operators with additional support elements. The timing is critical. The meeting is scheduled for 2300 hours. If we can hit the compound between 22:30 and 22:45, we catch them, gathering but before they're fully assembled and secured." "That's a narrow window," one of the team leaders observed. "Yes, but it maximizes our advantage. They'll be arriving, distracted by greetings and preliminaries. Security will be focused on perimeter observation, not internal threats." Vaughn walked closer to the display, his tactical mind clearly working through the scenario. "What about extraction? More targets means more time on the ground. That's more opportunity for things to go sideways." "Agreed," Irene said. "I recommend having backup extraction points here and here." She indicated positions on the map. "If the primary landing zone becomes compromised, these alternatives provide covered approaches and defensible positions." For the first time since she'd arrived at Task Force Poseidon, Irene saw something shift in Vaughn's expression. Not approval, exactly, but recognition. She was speaking his language now, thinking through tactical problems in ways that made sense to an operator. "The alternative extraction points are solid," Vaughn admitted. "But we'd need real-time intelligence during the operation. Someone monitoring communications, tracking security force responses, updating us on target movements inside the compound. That's standard for these operations," Hayes said. "Lieutenant Hill will be monitoring from here, providing updates via the tactical net." Irene took a breath. This was her moment. "Sir, I'd like to propose an alternative. Let me accompany the team as an attached intelligence asset. I can provide real-time analysis from the forward operating position, interpret communications as they happen, and make immediate assessments of the intelligence we're gathering." The room went silent. Hayes stared at her as if she suggested flying to the compound on a magic carpet. Vaughn's expression shifted from recognition back to skepticism. "Lieutenant," Hayes began, his tone suggesting the conversation was already over. "Sir, hear me out," Irene pressed. "I won't be part of the assault element. I'll remain with the security team at the landing zone. But from that position, I can monitor intercepts in real time, assess the intelligence we're gathering from the targets, and provide immediate analysis without the communication delay from the base." "Absolutely not," Vaughn said. "Sir, with all due respect to the lieutenant's enthusiasm, having a non-combat trained officer in the field would be a distraction we can't afford." "I am combat trained," Irene countered. "Every officer completes basic combat training. I've qualified with the standard weapons. I can defend myself if necessary." "Basic training isn't operator training," Vaughn shot back. "There's a massive difference between qualifying on a range and operating in a hostile environment." Hayes held up his hand for silence. "Lieutenant Hill, your analysis has been excellent. But Chief Vaughn is right. Your place is here, where you can coordinate with multiple intelligence feeds and provide comprehensive support. The forward position would actually limit your effectiveness." Irene knew she was losing the argument, but she couldn't let it go. Not this time. "Sir, respectfully, every mission I've supported from this operations center has been hampered by communication delays and my inability to provide context for real-time developments. When Sergeant Palmer's team encountered unexpected civilians last month, it took me 4 minutes to access the cultural database and provide guidance. 4 minutes where the team was exposed and vulnerable. That's the nature of operations," Hayes replied. "We accept those delays as part of the process." "But we don't have to," Irene insisted. Her accent grew thicker with passion, her words tumbling out faster. "Technology allows me to bring those databases to the field. I can provide immediate context, immediate analysis. You want warrior intelligence, Chief Vaughn? Let me show you what that actually looks like." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he said, "Sir, request permission to speak freely." Hayes nodded, clearly curious about where this was going. "Lieutenant Hill has a point about response time," Vaughn admitted. "On the Palmer operation, those 4 minutes felt like hours. We had weapons trained on civilians who were terrified, and we couldn't determine if they were genuine non-combatants or hostiles using families as cover. Real-time cultural intelligence would have helped." Irene tried not to show her shock. Was Vaughn actually supporting her? "However," Vaughn continued, and Irene's brief hope deflated, "bringing an untested officer into the field creates risks that outweigh the benefits. Even if she stays at the landing zone, she becomes a factor we have to account for. Someone we might have to protect or extract if things deteriorate." "I wouldn't be a factor," Irene argued. "I would follow orders, stay out of the way, and focus entirely on intelligence support." "You say that now," Vaughn replied. "But when the shooting starts, when things get chaotic, instinct takes over. Without operational experience, you don't know how you'll react." He wasn't wrong, and Irene knew it. She'd never been under fire, never experienced the chaos and terror of combat. But she also knew that she'd prepared for this moment more thoroughly than anyone realized. For months, she'd been training. Not openly, not as part of any official program, but on her own time. She befriended an Army Ranger instructor stationed at the base, convinced him to put her through modified operator training. Early mornings before her intelligence shifts, late evenings after everyone else had gone to their quarters, she'd learned close quarters combat, tactical movement, emergency medical procedures. She trained with night vision equipment, practiced calling in coordinates under stress, studied tactical communications protocols. Nobody knew because she'd kept it private, unwilling to face the mockery that would come if people discovered the intelligence officer was playing soldier. But now, that training might be relevant. "Chief Vaughn," she said quietly, "what if I could demonstrate operational competence? What if I could prove that I wouldn't be a liability?" Vaughn's eyebrows rose. "And how exactly would you do that, Lieutenant? Test me. Right now." Put me through whatever evaluation you use to assess new team members. If I fail, I'll drop this request and never bring it up again. If I pass, you at least consider letting me accompany the team to the forward position." The room had gone completely silent again. Hayes looked like he wanted to shut down this entire conversation, but he also seemed curious about where it would lead. "Sir," Vaughn said, turning to Hayes, "I think the lieutenant has made an interesting proposal. With your permission, I'd like to accept her challenge." "Chief, this is highly blessed, irregular," Hayes began. "Agreed, sir, but so is having an intelligence officer request field deployment. If Lieutenant Hill wants to prove she can handle operational stress, let's give her the opportunity. Either she demonstrates competence and we have a genuinely valuable asset, or she fails and we settle this question permanently." Hayes looked at Irene, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. "Lieutenant, you understand that if you fail Chief Vaughn's evaluation, this discussion is over. You'll focus on your assigned duties and stop pushing for field deployment." "I understand, sir," Irene replied, her heart racing. She'd just committed herself to a test she wasn't entirely sure she could pass. "Very well," Hayes said. "Chief Vaughn, you have 1 hour to evaluate Lieutenant Hill's operational readiness. Use whatever assessment you deem appropriate. Report back with your findings." Dismissed. As the room cleared, Vaughn approached Irene. Up close, she could see the skepticism in his eyes, but also something else. Possibly respect for her willingness to back up her words with action. "You sure about this, Lieutenant?" he asked quietly. "I'm not going to go easy on you because you're an officer or because you're a woman. If you want to prove you can hang with the teams, I'm going to test you like I'd test any operator." "I wouldn't want it any other way, Chief," Irene replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "All right then. Meet me at the training facility in 15 minutes. Bring your combat gear. And Lieutenant, I hope you're as prepared as you think you are." The training facility was a converted warehouse on the edge of the base, outfitted with everything from shooting ranges to mock urban environments. Irene arrived in her combat gear, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She changed into tactical pants, boots, and a lightweight combat shirt, with her equipment vest loaded according to standard protocols. Vaughn was already there, along with 2 other operators she recognized from the team. They'd set up what looked like an obstacle course combined with tactical scenarios. "Lieutenant Hill," Vaughn greeted her formally. "Here's how this works. I've designed a series of evaluations that test the skills you'd need in a forward operating position. Physical fitness, weapons proficiency, tactical decision-making, and stress management. You'll go through each station sequentially. Any questions?" "No, Chief. I'm ready." "We'll see. First station is basic combat fitness. You'll complete this course carrying a 40-pound pack. Time standard is 12 minutes. Begin when ready." Irene shouldered the weighted pack and approached the starting line. The course consisted of low crawls under wire, wall climbs, tire runs, and a final sprint. It was designed to exhaust candidates while testing functional strength. She'd run variations of this course dozens of times during her private training sessions. As she moved through the obstacles, she focused on breathing and efficiency rather than speed. The pack felt heavy but manageable, and her months of early morning training paid off as she navigated each challenge. Vaughn called out her time as she crossed the finish line. 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Acceptable. There might have been the smallest hint of surprise in his voice. The second station tested weapons proficiency. Vaughn handed her a rifle and directed her to a shooting range set up with multiple targets at varying distances. "Standard qualification course," he explained. 40 rounds, multiple positions. Minimum score to pass is 35 hits. Irene checked the weapon, loaded the magazine, and approached the firing line. Her hands remembered the countless hours she'd spent at the range with her ranger friend, perfecting her stance and trigger control. The rifle felt comfortable, familiar. She fired methodically, controlling her breathing between shots. Standing, position, kneeling, prone. Each transition smooth and practiced. When she finished, Vaughn walked downrange to check her targets. 38 hits, he announced, returning to her position. Better than some of my junior operators. Where'd you learn to shoot, Lieutenant? I've been practicing, Chief, Irene replied, not elaborating. Clearly, he gestured toward the next station, a mock-up of a building interior. This is where it gets interesting. Tactical decision-making under stress. You'll enter this structure. Inside, there are 6 scenarios. Some involve hostiles, some involve civilians, some involve both. You'll need to make immediate threat assessments and respond appropriately. You'll be using training ammunition, but the stress will be real. Ready? Irene's heart rate increased. This was closer to actual operational conditions, the kind of chaos Vaughn had suggested she couldn't handle. Ready, Chief. As she entered the darkened building, her training took over. First, room clear. Second room, armed hostile behind a barrier. She engaged, double-tapped to center mass, continued movement. Third room, civilian woman holding a child. She lowered her weapon, called out friendly commands in multiple languages, moved past. The scenarios continued, each designed to test her judgment under pressure. Armed, hostile, mixed with civilians. Wounded friendly, requiring immediate assistance. Barricaded position, requiring tactical approach. Irene moved through each scenario, her mind cataloging threats and making split-second decisions. When she emerged from the structure, Vaughn was reviewing video footage from cameras inside. He watched several sequences, his expression neutral. "You hesitated in room 4, he observed. "Yes, Chief. The hostile was using a civilian as a shield. I was assessing whether I could take the shot without risking the civilian." "And your decision?" "I didn't have a clean shot. I moved to get a better angle and then engaged when the hostile shifted position." Vaughn nodded slowly. "That's the right call. Hasty shooting gets people killed." He paused. "You've had training beyond basic officer courses, haven't you?" "I've been preparing myself, Chief. On my own time, with qualified instructors. I knew that if I ever wanted to be taken seriously by this community, I'd need more than just intelligence credentials." "Why didn't you mention this before? Why hide it?" Irene met Vaughn's question with complete honesty. "Because I knew how it would be received, Chief. The intelligence officer playing soldier, trying to be something she's not. It would have been another reason to dismiss me, another example of me not understanding my place." Vaughn was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his tone had changed subtly. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be straight with you. When you first arrived at this task force, I didn't think you belonged here. I saw another staff officer who'd never been downrange trying to tell operators how to do their jobs. I've seen it before, and it never ends well. I know, Chief. I've felt that resistance from day one. But what I'm seeing here," Vaughn continued, gesturing at the training stations, "this isn't someone playing soldier. This is someone who's put in serious work to develop genuine skills. Your time on that combat course was better than some of the junior SEALs on this base. Your shooting was solid. Your tactical decision-making showed good judgment and self-control." Irene felt something loosen in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "Does that mean I passed your evaluation?" "It means you've proven you won't be a complete liability in the field," Vaughn replied. "But there's one more test, and it's the most important one. Come with me." He led her to a small room set up with communications equipment and computer terminals, similar to what she'd use in a forward operating position. "This is a simulated tactical operation," Vaughn explained. "You'll be monitoring multiple intelligence feeds while a team is conducting an assault. Your job is to provide real-time intelligence updates, identify threats, and help the team leader make informed decisions. The scenario will include multiple complications and require you to prioritize information under pressure." He handed her a headset. "The team leader's call sign is Viking 1. He'll be expecting intelligence support from you, call sign Shadow. The operation begins in 30 seconds. Try to keep up." Irene settled into the chair, pulled up the various data feeds, and prepared herself. This was her element, the place where she'd always excelled. But now she had to prove she could do it under operational stress. The simulation began. Viking 1's voice came through her headset, calm and professional. "Shadow, Viking 1. Team is approaching the target building. Request updated intelligence on hostile positions. Irene scanned the thermal imaging and communications intercepts. Viking 1, Shadow. Thermal shows 4 signatures in the main structure, 2 in the eastern room, 2 in the western room. No movement in the courtyard. Communications intercept from 3 minutes ago suggests they're not expecting company. Copy, Shadow. Team is entering now. The simulation progressed rapidly. Irene monitored multiple feeds simultaneously, calling out threats as they appeared, providing updates on civilian presence, alerting the team to changes in enemy communications. The scenario threw complications at her relentlessly. Unexpected reinforcements, civilian vehicles approaching, communication disruptions, weather deterioration. She handled each challenge methodically, prioritizing information based on immediate threat level, speaking clearly despite the stress. When Viking 1's team made contact with hostiles, she provided tactical guidance based on building layouts and enemy positions visible in the thermal imaging. Viking 1, Shadow. Be advised, thermal shows 3 additional hostiles moving to your position from the north. 20 seconds to contact. Copy, Shadow. Can you give me their exact position? Irene overlaid the thermal feed with the building schematic. North corridor, 12 meters from your position. They're moving fast, weapons drawn. Recommend falling back to defendable position at the intersection. Moving now. Shadow, I need exfil options. Primary landing zone is compromised. Irene's mind raced through the contingency plan she'd memorized. Viking 1. Recommend alternate landing zone Golf. Coordinates being transmitted now. Distance from your position is 200 meters northwest. Clear approach. Covered route. The simulation continued for another 10 minutes, each moment requiring immediate decisions and clear communication. When it finally ended, Irene realized her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Vaughn had been standing behind her the entire time, watching her work. Now he leaned forward and switched off the equipment. That scenario was designed for experienced intelligence operators, he said quietly. It typically takes people 15 to 20 minutes to complete. You did it in 12, and you didn't miss a single critical update. Irene turned to face him. So, Lieutenant Hill, I'm going to recommend to Commander Hayes that you be allowed to accompany the team to the forward position tonight. You've proven you have the skills and, more importantly, the judgment to be useful rather than a liability. The words hit Irene like a physical force. After months of dismissal and doubt, Vaughn, her harshest critic, was endorsing her. However, Vaughn continued, his expression serious, understand that if I make this recommendation, you become my responsibility. If something goes wrong, if you freeze up or make mistakes that endanger the team, that's on me. I need to know you understand the stakes. I understand, Chief. I won't let you down. Vaughn studied her for a long moment. I believe you. But, Lieutenant, one more thing. Out there, rank doesn't matter as much as competence. If I give you an order during the operation, I need to know you'll follow it immediately without question. Can you do that? Yes, Chief. In the field, you're the tactical authority. I'll follow your orders. All right then. Let's go brief Commander Hayes on why I think bringing an intelligence officer into a combat zone is somehow a good idea. This should be an interesting conversation. As they walked back toward the operations center, Irene felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and terror. She'd gotten what she asked for, the chance to prove her value in the field. Now she had to deliver on that promise. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over Souda Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In a few hours, she'd be on a helicopter heading toward a hostile compound, finally getting the chance to show these operators what warrior intelligence really meant. She just hoped she was as ready as she claimed to be. Commander Hayes listened to Vaughn's report with an expression that cycled through disbelief, concern, and reluctant consideration. They stood in his private office, away from the other operators, as Vaughn detailed Irene's performance during the evaluation. Chief, let me understand this correctly, Hayes said, leaning back in his chair. You're recommending that I allow Lieutenant Hill, an intelligence officer with 0 combat deployments, to accompany tonight's mission to a hostile compound? Yes, sir. But she wouldn't be part of the assault element. She'd remain at the forward operating position with the security team, providing real-time intelligence support. Hayes turned to Irene. Lieutenant, this isn't a training exercise. If things go wrong, people die. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared for that reality? Irene had been asking herself the same question since passing Vaughn's evaluation. The honest answer was that she couldn't be certain until she experienced it. But that wasn't what Hayes needed to hear. Sir, I understand the risks, but I also understand the value I can provide. Tonight's operation has become significantly more complex with multiple high-value targets. Having an intelligence analyst at the forward position who can interpret communications in real time, identify targets as they're captured, and provide immediate context could be the difference between a successful mission and a missed opportunity. Or it could be a distraction that gets someone killed. Hayes countered. With respect, sir, Chief Vaughn has evaluated me and determined I won't be a liability. I trust his judgment, and I hope you do as well. Hayes looked at Vaughn. Chief, your honest assessment. Is this worth the risk? Vaughn didn't hesitate. Sir, 3 hours ago, I would have said absolutely not. But after watching Lieutenant Hill perform under simulated operational stress, I believe she can contribute meaningfully to this mission. Her intelligence analysis during the simulation was exceptional. She processed multiple data streams simultaneously, prioritized information effectively, and made sound tactical recommendations. Those skills are exactly what we need tonight. She performed well in the simulation, Hayes emphasized. Real operations are different. Agreed, sir. But everyone's first operation is their first operation. We all had to start somewhere. The difference is that Lieutenant Hill has prepared herself more thoroughly than most people do before their first deployment. She's earned the right to try. Hayes studied both of them, his decision weighing heavily in the silence. Finally, he stood and walked to the window overlooking the base. Lieutenant Hill, if I approve this, you follow Chief Vaughn's orders without question. If he tells you to stay down, you stay down. If he tells you to evacuate, you evacuate. Your intelligence analysis becomes secondary to following tactical orders. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. And Chief, she's your responsibility. You vouch for her, you protect her, you make sure she comes back alive. Understood, sir. Hayes turned back to face them. Against my better judgment and with serious reservations, I'm approving Lieutenant Hill's attachment to tonight's operation. But Lieutenant, understand this. If your presence causes any complications, if you become a liability in any way, this will be your first and last field deployment. You'll spend the rest of your assignment at this task force behind a desk. Do you accept those terms? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You still have to survive the night. Hayes checked his watch. Mission brief is at 1900 hours. I expect both of you there, and I expect a modified operational plan that accounts for Lieutenant Hill's presence. Dismissed. As they left Hayes' office, Vaughn stopped Irene in the corridor. You just committed yourself to something that most people train months or years for. I need to know you're not having second thoughts. I'm terrified, Chief, but I'm not having second thoughts. Vaughn's expression softened slightly. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence gets you killed. Between now and mission launch, I want you to stick close to me. We're going to go over every aspect of your role, every contingency, every signal and protocol. When we step onto that helicopter, I need to know you can function as part of this team. I won't let you down, Chief. See that you don't. Because if something happens to you out there, I'll have to explain to your family why I thought bringing an intelligence officer into a combat zone was a good idea. That's not a conversation I want to have. They spent the next 3 hours in intensive preparation. Vaughn walked Irene through tactical hand signals, emergency procedures, evacuation protocols, and the specific roles of each team member. He introduced her to the security element she'd be working with at the forward position. 4 experienced operators who would provide protection while she focused on intelligence gathering. Sergeant Kyle Reeves, the security team leader, was initially skeptical. Chief, no offense to the lieutenant, but we're trained to protect each other. Having a non-combatant in the mix changes our defensive posture. She's not a non-combatant, Vaughn replied. She's qualified with weapons and has demonstrated tactical competence. Treat her like you treat any attached asset. She stays in the protected zone, she follows orders, and she provides intelligence support. Your job is to maintain perimeter security, not to babysit. Reeves studied Irene with new interest. Lieutenant, you comfortable with a rifle? Yes, Sergeant. I've qualified and trained extensively. Good, because if our position gets hit, everyone fights. No passengers. Understood, Sergeant. The mission brief at 1900 hours brought together the Ray entire assault force. 12 operators would form the primary assault element, led by Vaughn. 4 more would provide security at the landing zone, including Reeves and his team. Air support would consist of 2 helicopters, one for insertion and extraction, another for overwatch and emergency backup. Hayes addressed the assembled team. Gentlemen, tonight's operation has evolved from a simple extraction to a potential high-value target capture. Lieutenant Hill's intelligence indicates we may have the opportunity to remove several key enemy leaders in a single operation. This increases both the potential reward and the risk. He gestured to the updated mission plan displayed on the screens. Lieutenant Hill will accompany the security element at the forward position. Her role is to provide real-time intelligence analysis, monitor communications, and identify captured targets. Chief Vaughn has assessed her as capable of performing these duties without becoming a liability. I expect everyone to integrate her into the operational plan accordingly. The briefing continued with detailed tactical planning. Each team member received specific assignments, contingency plans, and coordination protocols. Irene noticed that while some operators still cast doubtful glances her way, others seemed to have accepted her presence. Vaughn's endorsement carried significant weight in this community. As the briefing concluded, Hayes added one final note. For those who have concerns about Lieutenant Hill's presence, understand this. She's not here as an observer or a guest. She's here as a functioning member of this operation. Treat her as you treat any qualified team member. We succeed or fail together. The hours between the briefing and mission launch passed in a blur of final preparations. Irene checked and rechecked her equipment, loaded her tactical vest with everything she might need, and reviewed her intelligence files one more time. Her hands remained steady, though her heart raced with anticipation. At 2100 hours, the team assembled at the flight line. The 2 helicopters sat ready, their crews completing pre-flight checks. The Mediterranean night was clear and cool, stars visible above the ambient light of the base. Vaughn approached Irene as she finished loading her gear. Last chance to back out, Lieutenant. No one would think less of you. That's not true, Chief. I'd think less of me. I'm going. He nodded. Then let's review one more time. Your position at the landing zone is here. He pointed to a spot on his tactical map. You'll have cover from these rocks and clear sight lines to the approach routes. Your primary responsibility is monitoring communications and providing updates via the tactical net. Secondary responsibility is identifying captured targets as we bring them to the landing zone. Tertiary responsibility is your own security. Questions? None, Chief. I'm ready. Remember, if I call for evacuation, you move immediately. Don't wait to gather intelligence. Don't try to finish whatever you're working on. You move. Clear? Clear. The helicopter ride to the insertion point took 40 minutes. Irene sat squeezed between Reeves and another operator, the vibration of the rotors making conversation impossible. She used the time to center herself, reviewing everything she'd learned and prepared for. Through the helicopter's open door, she could see the dark landscape passing below, occasional lights marking villages and roads. Somewhere out there was the target compound, where armed men were gathering for a meeting that would define their organization's future. They had no idea that 12 American operators were about to change those plans dramatically. The pilot's voice crackled through the headsets. 5 minutes to insertion, Vaughn's voice followed. All teams, weapons check. Shadow, you ready? Shadow was Irene's call sign. Hearing it used operationally sent a thrill through her system. Shadow ready, Viking 1. Good. Remember your training. Trust your preparation. We've got this. The helicopter began its descent, and Irene's stomach lurched. This was it. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd prepared for, came down to the next few hours. The landing zone was a flat area approximately 400 meters from the target compound, surrounded by rocky terrain that provided natural cover. The helicopter touched down briefly, just long enough for the team to dismount, then lifted away into the darkness. Sudden silence enveloped them, broken only by the distant sound of the helicopter's retreat and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Irene's night vision equipment painted the world in green monochrome as she followed Reeves to their designated position. Shadow, Viking 1. Security team in position? Vaughn's voice was barely a whisper through the radio. Viking 1, Shadow. Positive. Security set, communications online, beginning intel monitoring. Copy. Assault element moving to target. ETA 15 minutes. Irene settled into her position behind a cluster of rocks that provided both protection and a clear view of the surrounding area. She pulled out her portable communications equipment and began scanning frequencies, looking for any indication that their presence had been detected. The intercepts were routine at first. Guards checking in, normal security protocols, nothing suggesting alarm. She monitored the assault team's progress through brief radio updates, each one confirming they were moving according to plan. Then, 12 minutes into the operation, she intercepted something that made her blood run cold. Viking 1, Shadow. Priority alert. Intercepting communications in Arabic. Multiple speakers discussing unexpected vehicle approaching the compound. They're going on heightened alert. Copy. Shadow. Can you identify the vehicle? Irene switched to the satellite feed on her tablet, zooming in on the compound area. There, approaching on the access road, was a convoy of 3 vehicles she hadn't seen in any previous intelligence. Viking 1, Shadow. 3 vehicles appears to be additional security arriving. Could be reinforcements, or could be more high-value targets. Either way, your timeline just got compressed. Understood. Assault element. Double time to breach point. We hit them before those vehicles arrive. Irene watched through the satellite feed as the assault team accelerated their approach. The timing was going to be incredibly tight. If the vehicles arrived before the breach, the entire operation could collapse into a firefight with unknown numbers of hostiles. Viking 1. Vehicles are 60 seconds from compound entrance. You need to move now. Moving. Stand by for breach. The next 60 seconds stretch like hours. Irene monitored multiple feeds simultaneously. The compound security communications, the satellite view, the assault team's progress, ready to provide whatever information Vaughn needed. Then Vaughn's voice cut through. Breach, breach, breach. Shadow, be advised, going loud. The distant sound of explosions reached the landing zone as the assault team blew the compound entrance. Irene's communications equipment erupted with panicked voices in Arabic as the targets inside realized they were under attack. Viking 1, Shadow. Internal communications show confusion and panic. Counting at least 8 distinct voices, possibly more, they're trying to coordinate a defense but having communication problems. Copy, keep monitoring. We're entering the structure now. The operation descended into controlled chaos. Irene's ears filled with the sounds of combat filtered through multiple radio channels. Vaughn's calm commands, the assault team's brief acknowledgments, the panic shouts from the compound's internal communications. She focused on filtering the noise, extracting actionable intelligence from the cacophony. Viking 1, Shadow. Intercept suggests. One of your targets is attempting to flee through the eastern exit. Description matches Kratos. Medium build, dark jacket, carrying a briefcase. Copy, Shadow. Team 2, cover that exit. Kratos is attempting exfil. Through her satellite feed, Irene watched the thermal signatures move through the compound. The assault team was executing precisely, clearing rooms and securing targets. But those 3 vehicles had arrived and disgorged additional fighters, complicating the situation. Viking 1, Shadow. New hostiles from the vehicles are moving to reinforce. Count 6 fighters, heavily armed, approaching from the southern perimeter. How long until they reach our position? Irene calculated quickly. 90 seconds at their current pace. Team 3, break off and intercept southern approach. Keep those reinforcements away from the main building. The radio filled with brief confirmations and the sound of renewed gunfire. Irene monitored the developing situation, her mind processing multiple data streams. This was what she'd trained for. The ability to see the entire operational picture, and provide the information that kept people alive. Beside her, Reeves and his security team maintained perimeter watch, their weapons trained on the approaches to the landing zone. They'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, everyone knowing their role, trusting each other to execute. Shadow, Viking 1. We've secured 4 targets, including Prometheus and Apollo. Kratos is in custody. Hades was not present. Preparing for exfil, but we've got a problem. Irene's heart rate spiked. Go ahead, Viking 1. The reinforcements brought heavy weapons. They've established a blocking position between us and the landing zone. We can't move the captured targets through that fire. This was the scenario Vaughn had feared. The assault team pinned down with captured high-value targets and no clear extraction route. Irene pulled up the tactical map, her mind racing through options. Viking 1 Shadow. Recommend alternate route through the northwestern ravine. It adds 300 meters to your exfil, but it bypasses the blocking position. I'm transmitting coordinates now. Shadow, that ravine wasn't in the original plan. You sure it's passable? Irene zoomed in on her satellite imagery, examining the terrain. She'd studied this area for weeks, memorized every geographic feature. The ravine was narrow and rocky, but it was passable. Positive, Viking 1. I've analyzed the terrain extensively. The ravine provides covered approach and brings you to the landing zone from the north. The blocking position won't have sightlines on your movement. There was a pause, filled with the sound of gunfire and shouted commands. Then Vaughn's voice came back. Copy, Shadow. We're trusting your analysis. Team 1, follow Shadow's coordinates through the northwestern ravine. Move now. Irene watched the thermal signatures on her screen as the assault team began their modified exfil route. They moved quickly but carefully, burdened by 4 captured targets who were zip-tied and being half-carried by the operators. Viking 1, Shadow. You've got clear passage for the first 200 meters. After that, there's a narrow section where you'll need to move single file. Recommend sending a scout element ahead to ensure it's clear. Copy. Team lead, take point and secure the narrow section. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Irene continued monitoring communications, alert for any indication that the enemy had detected the assault team's new route. The blocking position continued firing toward the compound, apparently unaware that their targets had already slipped away. Shadow, Viking 1. We've cleared the narrow section. What's our distance to the landing zone? 100 meters. You're coming in from the north as planned. Security team has eyes on your approach. Reeves confirmed through the radio. Viking 1. Security. We have visual. Path to Doe. Landing zone is clear. Bring them home. Irene felt a wave of relief as the first members of the assault team emerged from the darkness, their thermal signatures resolving into actual figures through her night vision. They moved with practiced efficiency, the captured targets stumbling between operators who kept them moving despite their resistance. Vaughn was the last to arrive, bringing up the rear security. He immediately moved to Irene's position. Shadow status on those reinforcements? Still engaged at the southern position. They haven't realized you've relocated. But that won't last long. Agreed. We need immediate exfil. Calling in the bird now. He keyed his radio. Falcon 1, Viking 1. Package is secure. Request immediate extraction at primary landing zone. The helicopter pilot's response was immediate. Viking 1, Falcon 1. Inbound to your position. ETA, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Irene continued scanning her communications intercepts, knowing that any moment the enemy could realize their mistake and redirect toward the landing zone. The assault team established a defensive perimeter, weapons trained outward, while the captured targets lay prone in the center of the formation. Then Irene heard it. A change in the enemy communications, confusion giving way to realization. Viking 1, they've figured it out. Enemy forces are redirecting to the landing zone. You've got multiple vehicles en route from the compound. How long? 4 minutes? Maybe 5? Vaughn's voice remained calm. We'll be gone in 3. Security team, watch for vehicle approach from the south and east. Anything that moves toward this position, you light it up. The sound of the helicopter's rotors grew louder, and Irene saw the aircraft's thermal signature approaching on her screen. The pilot was coming in fast, trading stealth for speed. Viking 1, Falcon 1. 30 seconds out, pop smoke. One of the operators tossed a smoke grenade, marking the landing zone with infrared signature, visible only through night vision. The helicopter descended rapidly, its downdraft creating a maelstrom of dust and debris. The extraction happened with practiced efficiency. Operators loaded the captured targets first, hauling them aboard the helicopter despite their struggles and protests. The assault team followed, each member taking assigned positions. "Security team, you're last," Vaughn shouted over the rotor noise. "Shadow, move now." Irene grabbed her equipment and ran toward the helicopter, Reeves and his team providing covering fire as they collapsed their perimeter. She just reached the aircraft's door when headlights appeared in the distance, vehicles racing toward their position. "Contact! Vehicles approaching." Reeves called out, his weapon trained on the approaching threat. Irene climbed aboard the helicopter, strong hands pulling her inside. She immediately moved to a position where she could continue monitoring her equipment. Through the open door, she watched Reeves and his team sprint toward the aircraft, enemy fire beginning to kick up dirt around them. They were taking too long. The vehicles were getting closer, and Irene could see muzzle flashes from their mounted weapons. The helicopter couldn't take off with the security team still boarding, but staying on the ground much longer would turn them into a stationary target. Falcon 1, Viking 1, all personnel aboard. "Get us out of here!" The helicopter lurched upward just as the last security team member pulled himself inside. Bullets pinged off the aircraft's armored hull, and the door gunner returned fire with devastating accuracy, his heavy weapon tearing into the approaching vehicles. Taking fire from multiple positions, the pilot reported calmly, going evasive. The helicopter banked hard, accelerating away from the landing zone. Through the door, Irene watched the compound recede into the darkness, smoke rising from multiple fires where the assault team had breached and cleared. They'd done it. They'd captured 3 high-value targets in a complex operation that had gone sideways multiple times. And her intelligence support had been crucial to their success. Vaughn moved through the crowded helicopter until he reached Irene's position. He had to shout over the rotor noise, "Your alternate route saved us. If we tried to push through that blocking position with captured targets, we'd still be pinned down. Just doing my job, Chief." "No, Lieutenant. You did more than your job. You performed like an experienced operator. The analysis, the real-time updates, the tactical recommendations, all of it was exactly what we needed." Around them, other operators were nodding in agreement. Even Reeves, who'd been skeptical, gave her a thumbs up. The helicopter ride back to base took 45 minutes. Irene spent the time documenting her intelligence observations and beginning the preliminary identification of the captured targets. She confirmed Prometheus and Apollo through photographic comparison and biometric data. Kratos would require additional verification, but she was confident in the initial assessment. When they landed at Souda Bay, a full debrief team was waiting, along with Commander Hayes. Medical personnel took custody of the captured targets, while the assault team gathered for initial after-action reports. Hayes approached Vaughn and Irene, his expression unreadable. "Chief, Lieutenant, with me." They followed him to a private briefing room, away from the celebration and chaos of the successful mission. Once the door closed, Hayes turned to face them. "I want a full accounting of Lieutenant Hill's role in tonight's operation. Chief Vaughn, your assessment?" Vaughn didn't hesitate. "Sir, Lieutenant Hill was instrumental to mission success. Her real-time intelligence prevented us from walking into an ambush, identified an alternate exfil route when our primary was compromised, and provided continuous tactical updates that allowed us to maintain operational advantage. Without her presence at the forward position, we would have faced significantly higher risk and potentially failed to extract the targets." Hayes turned to Irene. "Lieutenant, your assessment of your own performance?" Irene considered her response carefully. "Sir, I believe I demonstrated that intelligence officers can provide significant value in forward positions when properly trained and integrated into operations. The real-time analysis capability and immediate access to multiple data sources proved crucial when the tactical situation evolved. However, I also recognized the limitations of my role. When the security situation became dynamic, I relied on the security team for protection and focused on my assigned duties. Hayes nodded slowly. I received radio reports throughout the operation. What I heard was an intelligence officer functioning as an effective team member under combat conditions. Lieutenant Hill, you've proven your concept. The question now is what we do with that proof. Sir, Irene wasn't sure where this was going. Task Force Poseidon has been operating with traditional intelligence support, analysts providing briefings but remaining at the base during operations. You've demonstrated an alternative model. I'm considering formalizing your role as a forward deployed intelligence asset, but that would require additional training, additional certifications, and a complete restructuring of how we integrate intelligence into operations. Vaughn spoke up. Sir, with respect, I think that restructuring would be valuable. Tonight demonstrated the advantage of having analytical capability at the operational level. Lieutenant Hill's presence didn't compromise security. It enhanced our tactical effectiveness. I agree, Hayes said, which is why I'm recommending Lieutenant Hill for advanced tactical training and formal certification as a forward intelligence operator. If approved by higher command, she'd become the model for a new type of intelligence integration across special operations forces. The words took a moment to register. Irene had hoped to prove she could contribute in the field. She hadn't expected to potentially revolutionize how intelligence officers were employed across the entire special operations community. Sir, I'm honored, and I'm ready for whatever training is required. Good, because if this model is adopted, you'll be training other intelligence officers in forward deployment procedures. You'll essentially be creating a new specialty within the intelligence community. Hayes extended his hand. Well done, Lieutenant. You've changed some minds tonight, including mine. Welcome to the operational side of special operations. As Irene shook his hand, she caught Vaughn's expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but there was definite respect there, the kind that had to be earned through performance under pressure. Chief Vaughn, Hayes continued, I'll need you to work with Lieutenant Hill on developing training protocols for other intelligence officers. Your endorsement will carry weight in the special operations community. Happy to do it, sir, though I reserve the right to make the training extremely difficult. I wouldn't expect anything less. Hayes checked his watch. It's 0300. Get some rest. We'll debrief the operation in detail tomorrow morning. Dismissed. Outside the briefing room, Vaughn stopped Irene one more time. Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. Chief, when you first arrived at this task force, I judged you based on assumptions rather than capabilities. I assumed you couldn't contribute operationally because you didn't fit my narrow definition of what an operator should be. Tonight, you proved me wrong, and you did it with professionalism and competence that exceeded most people with far more experience. Irene felt emotion welling up but kept her voice steady. Thank you, Chief. That means more than you know. You earned it. And Lieutenant, welcome to the team. The real team, not just the intelligence section. As Vaughn walked away toward the operations center, Irene stood alone in the Mediterranean night, letting the enormity of what had just happened sink in. She'd gone from dismissed intelligence officer to respected team member, from desk-bound analyst to forward deployed operator, from struggling for basic recognition to potentially reshaping how an entire community approached intelligence operations. The journey had required months of secret preparation, unwavering determination, and a willingness to risk everything on a single opportunity. But standing there in the warm Greek night, with a successful mission behind her and new possibilities ahead, Irene knew it had all been worth it. She'd set out to prove that she deserved respect. Instead, she'd proven something far more important, that challenging assumptions and pushing boundaries could create opportunities that didn't exist before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new training, new responsibilities. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd earned her place among warriors, not by becoming something she wasn't, but by being exceptional at what she was. And that, Irene realized, was the most important victory of all. 6 months later, Irene stood in front of a classroom filled with intelligence officers from across the special operations community. The training facility at Fort Bragg was a far cry from the dusty operations center in Souda Bay, but the mission remained the same, preparing intelligence professionals to function effectively in forward operational environments. The key distinction, she explained, gesturing to the tactical display behind her, is understanding that forward intelligence support isn't about becoming an operator. It's about bringing analytical capability closer to the point of action, reducing the communication delay that can cost lives and compromise missions. The students, a mix of Army, Navy, and Air Force intelligence officers, listened intently. Some were skeptical. She could see it in their expressions. They'd heard about the European lieutenant who'd somehow convinced a SEAL task force to take her into the field, but they weren't sure if the model could be replicated. I know what some of you are thinking, Irene continued, her accent still present but her confidence unshakable. You're thinking that my experience was unique, that it only worked because of specific circumstances or personalities, but what I learned during that operation, and in the dozens that followed, is that forward intelligence support works because it addresses a fundamental problem in how we conduct special operations. She pulled up a case study from a recent mission. Traditional intelligence support creates a gap between analysis and action. An operator encounters something unexpected in the field, radios back to base, waits for analysis, receives guidance, and then acts. In fast-moving situations, that delay can be critical. Forward intelligence support collapses that timeline. The analyst is right there, with immediate access to data and the ability to provide instantaneous context. One of the students raised his hand. Ma'am, how do you balance the need for intelligence support with the security concerns of having non-combatants in hostile environments? Irene smiled. She'd heard this question dozens of times. That's the wrong framework. Forward intelligence operators aren't non-combatants. They're trained, qualified personnel who can defend themselves if necessary, but whose primary value is analytical, not tactical. The security element protects the entire forward position, including the intelligence operator. It's no different than protecting a communications specialist or a combat medic. The training program she developed over the past 6 months was comprehensive. Physical fitness, standards that matched basic operator requirements, weapons qualification and tactical movement training, emergency medical procedures, communications protocols, and, most importantly, intensive practice in maintaining analytical focus under simulated combat stress. After the classroom session, Irene met with Chief Vaughn, who'd been instrumental in developing the training curriculum. He'd been temporarily assigned to the schoolhouse to help establish the program, lending his operational credibility to the new concept. How'd they look? Vaughn asked as they walked toward the practical training area. Motivated but uncertain. They're still processing the idea that intelligence officers can operate forward without being a liability. Same skepticism I had about you, Vaughn admitted, until you proved otherwise. That's what this program is about, giving them the tools and confidence to prove themselves the way you did. They reached the practical training area where students would spend the afternoon running through simulated operational scenarios. The setup mimicked forward operating positions, complete with communications equipment, tactical displays, and role players who would create realistic complications and stressors. You know, Vaughn said, watching the students prepare for their exercises, when I first challenged your qualifications in that briefing room, I never imagined we'd end up here, training the next generation of forward intelligence operators based on a model you created. I never imagined it either, Chief. I just wanted to prove I could contribute. You did more than contribute. You changed how an entire community thinks about intelligence integration. That's legacy-level impact. Irene watched the students begin their exercises, seeing herself in their determination and nervousness. She remembered standing in Souda Bay, desperate for an opportunity to prove her worth. Now she was creating those opportunities for others. Later that evening, Irene received a call from Commander Hayes, now promoted to full commander and serving at SOCOM headquarters. Lieutenant Hill, I wanted to give you a heads up. The Forward Intelligence Operator Program is being expanded. Based on the success of the pilot program and the performance of your first graduating class, we're implementing the model across all Special Operations task forces. That's excellent news, sir. It is. And it's happening because you were willing to challenge the status quo and prove a better way existed. I also wanted to inform you that you're being promoted to Lieutenant Commander and assigned as the program director. You'll oversee all training, certification, and deployment of forward intelligence operators across SOCOM. The magnitude of the announcement took a moment to register. She was being given authority over an entire new specialty within special operations, with responsibility for training and certifying officers who would deploy to the most dangerous environments in the world. Sir, I am honored, and I'm ready for the responsibility. I know you are. You've earned this, Irene. Not just through that one successful operation, but through the months of work you've put into building this program from nothing. You saw a gap in our capabilities and filled it. That's what great officers do. After the call ended, Irene walked outside into the North Carolina evening. The air was humid and warm, so different from the Mediterranean climate of Greece where this journey had begun. But the core mission remained constant, using intelligence to keep operators safe and missions successful. She thought about that morning in Souda Bay when Vaughn had publicly questioned her qualifications. At the time, it had felt like the end of her credibility. Instead, it had become the beginning of something much larger. His challenge had forced her to prove herself in ways that traditional career paths never would have required. The disrespect she'd faced, the doubt, the assumption that she didn't belong, all of it had been fuel for the fire that drove her to excel. And now, that same excellence was creating opportunities for others who might face similar challenges. 1 year after that pivotal operation in Greece, Irene returned to Souda Bay for a reunion with Task Force Poseidon. The base looked exactly the same. The Mediterranean still sparkled in the distance, and the operations center still smelled of coffee and salt air. But everything else had changed. The task force now had 2 forward intelligence operators permanently assigned, both graduates of Irene's training program. They'd successfully integrated into the team's operations, providing the real-time analytical support that had become crucial to the unit's enhanced mission success rate. Commander Hayes, visiting from SOCOM headquarters, hosted a small ceremony recognizing the original mission that had launched the Forward Intelligence Operator program. The assembled personnel included operators from that night's operation, current task force members, and several of Irene's former students who were now deployed across various special operations units. What Lieutenant Commander Hill accomplished, Hayes told the gathering, wasn't just about one successful mission. It was about having the courage to challenge assumptions, the determination to prepare thoroughly, and the wisdom to know that proving yourself sometimes means stepping outside your comfort zone and into uncertainty. Vaughn stood beside Irene during the ceremony, his presence a symbol of how far they'd both come. From antagonist to advocate, from skeptic to supporter, his transformation had been as significant as her own. After the ceremony, the original assault team gathered informally, sharing stories and catching up. The dynamic had completely shifted. Irene wasn't the outsider anymore. She was a respected colleague whose contributions had materially changed how they operated. "Remember when I said you were too soft for special operations?" one operator asked, laughing at his own past judgment. "I was an idiot." "You weren't an idiot," Irene replied. "You were skeptical based on legitimate concerns. I had to prove that those concerns could be addressed through proper preparation and integration. That's not being an idiot. That's being professional." As the sun set over Souda Bay, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple, Irene found herself standing at the same spot where she'd stood a year ago, watching the assault team depart for the nightfall operation. Then, she'd been fighting for basic recognition. Now, she was overseeing a program that would train hundreds of intelligence officers in forward deployment procedures. Vaughn joined her at the observation point. "Thinking about how far you've come? Thinking about how far we've all come? This wasn't just my journey, Chief. It was about changing how an entire community thinks about integration and capability." "True, but it started with you refusing to accept limitations others placed on you. That took courage," Irene smiled. "It took desperation, honestly. I was so tired of being dismissed that I was willing to risk everything on one operation. Looking back, it was probably reckless. Maybe. But sometimes reckless determination is exactly what's needed to break through entrenched thinking. You didn't just prove you could do the job. You proved the job itself was valuable, that it filled a genuine capability gap. That's the difference between a successful deployment and a transformative one." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the Mediterranean waves roll against the shore. Irene thought about all the intelligence officers who would follow the path she'd created, who would deploy forward with special operations teams and provide the real-time analysis that could save lives and accomplish missions. Her journey from dismissed analyst to program director had been marked by challenges, doubts, and moments where failure seemed inevitable. But each obstacle had been an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, to prove that competence transcended traditional boundaries, and to show that the most valuable contributions often came from unexpected places. The disrespect Vaughn had shown in that briefing room a year ago hadn't destroyed her. It had catalyzed a transformation that benefited everyone. His challenge had forced her to be better, to prepare more thoroughly, to prove herself beyond any reasonable doubt. And her response had changed how an entire community operated. "You know what the best part is?" Vaughn said, breaking the silence. "There are intelligence officers going through your training program right now who will never face the skepticism you faced, because you've already proven the concept works. You've created a path that others can follow without having to fight the same battles. That's the goal, Chief. Make it easier for the next generation than it was for us." As darkness fell over the base, Irene felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for her own achievements, but for the opportunities she'd created for others. The intelligence officers who would deploy forward and contribute to mission success. The operators who would benefit from immediate analytical support. The missions that would succeed because information arrived at the moment it was needed rather than minutes or hours later. Her story had started with a simple desire to prove she belonged. It had evolved into something much larger, a fundamental change in how special operations forces integrated intelligence capabilities. And it had all begun with one moment of public disrespect that could have ended her credibility, but instead became the catalyst for transformation. The lesson wasn't that disrespect was valuable. It was that response to adversity defined outcomes. Irene could have accepted the limitations others placed on her, could have stayed in her assigned role, and never pushed for more. Instead, she'd chosen to prepare, to persist, and to prove that excellence could overcome even the deepest skepticism. As she prepared to leave Souda Bay and return to her duties as program director, Irene took one last look at the operations center where this journey had begun.